Welcome to the Alchemy for Authors podcast. I'm your host, Jo Buer. If you're an author, aspiring author, writer, or wordsmith, you're in the right place. Join me every week as I chat with authors and industry professionals and share my own experiences about using manifestation and mindset practices to supercharge our writing lives. We'll explore ways to overcome writer's block and imposter syndrome. We'll find motivation and inspiration to get our butts in the chair and our stories written. And most importantly, we'll embark on creating lives and livings doing what we love. If you've ever dreamt of a prolific, wealthy, happy or healthy author career or writing practice, then this show is for you. So let's dive into Alchemy for Authors. Hello, my writerly friends. Can you believe it? It's spooky season already. And as someone who writes gothic, suspense, and ghost stories, this is definitely my time of the year. If you're like me and like your stories maybe a little bit dark and a little bit scary, make sure you go check out my store page at payhip.com/Jo Buer. To celebrate the spooky season, you can get 50% off any of my ebooks by using the coupon code SPOOKY. SPOOKY. But this promo is just for October, so make sure you check it out now. And I'll also make sure to put the link in the show notes too. So today's episode of Alchemy for Authors is all sorts of fun. I have a wonderful chat with middle grade and YA author Brandon J. Greer. Brandon is second and third oldest in a family of 10. He was second oldest until a new marriage brought a new child that bumped him to third. To set himself apart from so many siblings, he discovered the arts. Drawing, acting, and writing pulled him in at a young age. His first book, Around the World in About a Year, was completed in the 6th grade and was complete garbage, but it won him a place in an arts competition at the local university. Now, living in northern Utah with his wife and daughter, Brandon travels as much as he can. In this episode, Brandon not only shares his journey from writing short stories to novels, but gives tips on writing a successful query letter, marketing YA and middle grade books, and he gives insights around his experience with Kindle Vella. And just for a bit of fun, and to celebrate the beginning of the spooky season, Brandon also shares some of his real-life experiences with things that go bump in the night. So whether you're here to up-level your author career, or in today's case, here for the ghost stories, go grab yourself a cuppa, find a comfy chair, sit back, and enjoy the show. Hello, my lovelies. Welcome back to another episode of Alchemy for Authors. So today I'm joined by young adult and middle grade fantasy author, Brandon Greer. So welcome, Brandon, to the show. I'm happy to have you here.
Hi, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I would love if we could start with you sharing just a little bit about what drew you to writing in the first place.
Yeah, as I was growing up, I didn't read very much. And probably about when I turned 20, 21, 22, I don't know exactly how old I was, I just started getting into books and I just keep reading and reading and reading. And the one thing that came back to me that I heard a lot of people say was, if the book you want to read doesn't exist, then go ahead and write it. And so for years, I would just read and read and read, just a voracious reader. But I had these ideas of what a cool story would be. And I decided, well, if I'm not reading it, I'm going to have to write it. So I started off by writing short stories. I couldn't get myself to get to the point where I could write a full-length novel. It was too hard. I would just be writing and I would get like 3 pages in and my story's done. And so I would just do short stories all the time. And I thought that was okay. So I just did that for a while. But then the story that I really wanted to read came to my mind and I started working on it and finally wrote the novel. And that's kind of how I got into writing. I wanted to be able to write that story that I wanted to read.
That's cool. I think a lot of authors do that. I know that was my reason too, was to, write that story that you want to read yourself. So how was that transition then from going from short story to novel? Because it obviously took you a little while to get there, but what do you think pushed you to be able to actually see it through?
You know, the transition shocked me because I wasn't expecting it. Because what I was writing, the short story, was so completely different from what it turned into. I didn't expect it to be the story that I wanted to read. I started off when I was doing short stories. I really enjoyed writing twisted type fairy tales, putting different spins on things. And I started writing a story about Jack and the Beanstalk, but I wanted it to be from the giant's perspective. So I was trying to understand things from the giant's perspective. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if the giant started off being just a regular person who made a witch mad and the witch cursed him to keep growing and growing and growing? And I was more interested in the witch's side of the story. And as I'm writing it, before I realized I'm at 10 pages, 20 pages, 30 pages, and there's still so much left to tell. And I'm just like, this has never happened to me before. And I'm just shocked. I'm like, what is happening? I'm no longer a short story writer. And it took me a long time to actually finish the book. I think I started it, the idea 2007. And I think the book actually was finished in some kind of way by 2015. So it took me a long time to actually learn how to write a novel, especially when I was so used to working on short stories.
Yeah. So, did you have any training to help you through the process of writing a novel? Because I know I started out similar to you with writing short stories first, and it's completely different. It's very, very different the way that you work a short story versus a novel. So, did you have any courses that you did or books that you read or anything that kind of supported you to do that?
Not in the beginning. In the beginning, it was just books that I was reading. I would kind of look at those books and like how to tell a story. But as I kept going on, I started watching online courses, YouTube courses on writing, going to writers' conferences and taking the classes. But I never did any formal schooling or anything for writing. And so it's just what I could find on my own, like, okay, how do I do this? How do I make a good action scene? How do I write realistic dialogue? And I would just Google these things all the time and look for anything that anyone else would say on it. And so I would try and put it in practice. And after a while, I learned that I was no longer reading novels for pleasure. It was kind of like homework. And I'm just like, okay, how does this author do it? I really like their books. What's their style? And I would kind of write down notes on what they did and how they did it and see if I could incorporate that into my own style. And so I think the training that I received was everything that I read beforehand.
That's cool. That's really cool. I think that's so important. Reading for research, and half the time you don't even realize that you're doing it. I know I find that like you're just reading and then your brain's kind of working behind the scenes of, that's how they made that transition, or that's why they left their chapter like that or introduced that. That's really cool. So at the moment, you're writing for kids or for young adults. So for the middle grades and young adults, was that who your short stories were aimed for as well? Like, have you always aimed for those age groups, or is this something new?
Now, when I started writing stories, the short stories, I wanted something silly, something that would make people laugh and that I thought was amusing. And I think that's why when I got into reading, it was middle grade books, young adult books, because I like the storylines that revolved around it, got a little bit of humor, and I write clean. And so the young adult, the middle grade were clean. And so I like that concept of a clean book, a clean read, and something with humor in it if I, really wanted to. But the short stories more were humorous, short, like almost what you think maybe picture book type things, but maybe a little bit more adultish humor.
Yeah,
So I think along with that and what I was choosing to read kind of got me into that genre of what I like to write.
that's cool. And then you chose to go the route of traditional publishing, right?
Not at the beginning. I have a weird story, I think, there that when I we'll go back to, I think, 2014, 2015, when I finished the first real version of the story that I wanted to tell. And I took it to writers' conferences and I met with agents and I pitched and I got requests for sample pages, a couple full manuscripts, but everything I tried ended up just getting rejected, which a lot of author stuff does. And I didn't know if I wanted to put the time in as much. And so I started researching self-publishing. And this is where my story gets a little bit different than some other people's, because I put out this story that when I first published it, it was published under the name Laura Baines Gamble. And Laura Bain is a witch hunter who was enslaved to a demon. And I focused the story on him and I self-published it. And I didn't really see anything from it. I was looking on Amazon and I don't think I ever got a single sale for it, just the copies that I gave away. And after a while, I'm like, okay, something's off here. I don't know what's going on. So I pulled it and I started making changes. And at this time, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to republish it. But I have a friend who had just got published with a smaller publishing house in Utah. And she said, just send it to them, see what they think. And I'm like, but it's self-published. I don't think anyone will take it, because how many people do you hear say never query a self-published book? But I did it anyway. And the funny thing is after I queried it and I got them the information that they needed, I just like, nothing will ever come from this. And about 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, I get an email from them saying, hey, we want to set up a call with you. And so right off the bat, I'm like, okay, that's different. That hasn't happened before. And they ended up really liking the story and they wanted to publish it, but we made changes. We tweaked who the point of view was. So we changed it from Laura Bain, this witch hunter, to Maggie, who is a 15-year-old girl who is raised by humans, doesn't know she's a witch, but ends up becoming a witch in that her journey. So we kind of rebranded it that way. So it would be a bit different of a story, a bit different of a take on the original idea, but it turned out really good. And I'm glad that happened. We made the changes that were needed. So they were a good step for me to get into publishing. And during the transition time of when they were deciding, okay, are we going to take this book or not? I said, well, I've got this other book too. And now The Clandestine Queen, that's what we named Laura Bates Campbell to, is a young adult novel, yet on the lower side.
Mhm.
So a younger young adult novel. And I said, well, I've got this middle grade novel that I'm really excited about as well. Kind of told them about it. They said, yeah, send it to us. We'll look into that. And within 2-3 months, I had 2 book contracts, which I thought was amazing because I never thought it would happen.
Wow, that's a really cool story. I like that. That's kind of like a unicorn story, like something that, yeah,
Yeah.
is very rare to happen. So that's neat. And then when I've been looking into your background a little bit, you've also got a nonfiction book for authors about querying. So did that come about from this process that you went through, or how did that book come about?
Yeah. I spent so many hours researching queries just because I thought that I got into my mind, like I think a lot of authors do, that my book is good. I know my book is good. So the problem must be the query letter. So I spent hours and hours and hours just researching query letters online, looking at other people's query letters, um, just doing whatever I could to research that as much as I could. And I happened to find this lady named Angie Hodap. She still works for, or she used to work for, I'm not sure exactly where she's at, for the Nielsen Literary Agency. And she went around to a lot of conferences and taught on queries. So I followed her and I liked a lot of what she said, but there was a lot of other good information out there. And the one thing that stuck with me that I hated was the fact that you can go to all of these different places and say, if you want to write a good query letter, use this formula. And, yeah, it might have worked for them, but who would it not work for? And so I fixated on that idea of like, okay, there are so many people saying my formula works. It works, it works, it works. But it was very broad, very vague. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm going to take query letters and I'm going to break it down to something simpler. And I'm going to look at tons of query letters and I'm going to say, okay, what's the same in all of these query letters, especially these successful ones? And what do they put where? How do they put it? And so I ended up creating kind of a recipe on how to cook your query letter. And I always put it with cookie baking because I love to bake cookies. And it's something that a lot of people, have in common. I think we like cookies. So as I was thinking about it and I was having these ideas, before I even started writing the book, I was asked to speak at writers' conferences on query letters. And the one thing that really pushed me is my friend who had the same publisher as I did. She wasn't having any luck with her queries. Everything was getting rejected. And I said, well, let me take a look. And I put into her query what I was researching. And a little while later, I don't know how long it was, she's like, I've gotten 30 requests just because we changed the manuscript or the query letter. And she ended up getting 3 book contracts based off the changes that we made. So I'm like, okay, I think I've got something here. So let's fine tune it. I worked with her a little bit on it, and I was able to write this book after I had some chance looking at it more and doing the conferences. And I was actually able to do a conference on query letter writing just a few months ago. Hopefully I'll be able to do another one next year. I've got 2 that could happen next year, but I don't know why. I just found that query letters are very interesting to me.
Yeah, well, that's a really cool niche to actually have to help other authors. That's really great. So, what do you think then is one of the most common mistakes that people make when they're writing a query letter?
I think the most common mistake, other than what they write, is not the query letter. They leave out 3 elements that have to be there that I really push in my book. And that's, you have to build on 3 things. First is sympathy. Sympathy for the main character. You have to get the reader to care about this character within the first couple sentences. Mystery is the second one. And I like to say you have to put unanswered questions in your query letter. And not to the point where you're just asking questions and forgetting about them, but you write a sentence in such a way that the reader wants to know more. You can give away good information, but yet still be very vague about something where they're just like, I need to know more. I need to know more. Let's see, what was the third one? You want to make the character be realistic. You want the reader to say, I can feel for this. You want mystery. And then you want to be able to give stuff away to like revelations in the story so you can hook the reader with it. And I think in the process, we get to the point where we just want to give away too much in the query letter.
Mm.
So it's not telling the reader, hey, you need to know more. And I think that's one thing that a lot of people do wrong is they're not putting in that mystery and they're not making us feel enough sympathy for their character, even though a query letter can be very short. It's still possible to get that in there.
Yeah, that's really, really good tips. I'm going to make sure that I've got all 3 of your books in the show notes as well, so people can check them out. So whether they're into the middle year YA books, or if they just need some tips on writing query letters, I'll make sure that they can easily access those. That's really cool. Now, I've also been having a look, and you're doing a few other kind of fun things as well with your books. I saw on your website with the Clandestine Queen, you've actually got a maps page, which is really neat. So I'm assuming all those maps are part of the story?
Yeah, they are. And this just goes to show how bored I can get sometimes. I love fantasy books that have maps. You know, The Lord of the Rings, you open it up and you've got that great map right in the beginning. And I really wanted something like that. But by the time I figured out how to do it, it was too late to do it for the Clandestine Queen. And I found a website called Incarnate that allows you to do fantasy maps. And if you want all of the cool features, it's $5 a month. But I paid for a month and it was all I did. I was making all kinds of maps. And I'm like, well, I'm going to start just making all of these maps. And when I got into it, I really enjoyed it. And I was able to make a map for my middle grade novel, Liam Lewis and the Summer Camp Curse. And I actually convinced the publisher, hey, let's put this map in there. And we got it in good placement. So that's going to look great. So I'm excited to have a book that has a map in it. But there are a lot of different areas in my stories. And I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if I could create some kind of imagery that readers could go to and kind of see what I'm seeing? And so I'm including that in my website.
Yeah, that's really cool. I thought that was neat. Do you have the maps or draw out your own maps or anything like that before you start writing so you can keep the story all orderly and know what's happening and everything like that? Or is this more of a afterthought once you've written the story already?
Usually what happens is I'll write the first draft or begin writing the first draft. And as I'm getting it down, I kind of think about, okay, where are they at? And with fantasy, a lot of what I write isn't in this world. So I like to have a visual representation and I like to know, okay, where are they going? So I want to put a river here, a mountain range here, a city here. And I just play around and I draw my own maps at first, which is a lot of fun, but they're nowhere near before the. But then I put notes on my map. Like, okay, here, I want this to happen. When they get to this point, this is going to happen. And then as I'm going back and doing the edits, I can change it. Like, no, I want them to come here first, or I want them to go over here. And I think as in a writing fantasy or stories that happen in other worlds or other locations that are make believe, it helps a lot when you have a visual representation where your characters are actually going.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I, not to the same extent, but I know with my last novel, I had scribbles of what the house looked like because I had to make sure that, the characters were going in and out of different rooms at different times and different dramas were happening, that I didn't want to muck it up part way where a bedroom was changed the side of the hall it was on or anything like that. So I definitely understand the importance of sometimes having these maps written down so you can keep track of what's going on. Now, it looks like you've also been using Kindle Vella as well, which I don't know too much about. I'm in New Zealand and I don't think I'm able to use it being on this side of the world. But can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I know that for the moment, they've only opened it up to the US. I'm not even sure if it's just North America, like Canada or whatnot. But from what I'm hearing, it's only open to the US. And I'm not sure I like it that much because one thing that I didn't know too much, and I should have researched it more, so hopefully this can help people who are trying to get into it. There is not really a way to market or advertise other than doing your own. Like if you put a book on Amazon Kindle, they have advertising avenues that you can go down. You can do free. You can have ads. Right? They don't have any of that for Kindle yet. So the only way to promote it is by doing everything yourself. And the one place that I found to promote it is there's some Kindle Vella Facebook groups where it seems like it's just other authors that, hey, read my story, read my story. If you read mine, I'll read yours. And so I'm not sure how I feel about that. The one thing that I love about it is I've set a schedule for when episodes or chapters come out, and it keeps me moving forward. Like I've got to put it out. So it's like I'm giving myself these little deadlines that I have to meet if I want to keep up my consistency. And then once I'm done, I can just compile the whole thing into an ebook. So it gives me a little bit more accountability for myself to actually get everything out in the way that I want it to be. The book that I have on there, um, I've written it, the book's done. This is just allowing me to go through and edit it better, make changes. So I'm doing like almost final edits as I'm going through. I'm like, okay, I'll post this chapter now because I'm done. And you get paid per episode. And they do a token system where readers pay for tokens and you get like cents per chapter because it's based on word count, but they do a monthly bonus. And it wasn't something I was expecting. I'm not doing too great on Bella right now just because that's not where my priority is on marketing or advertising. But still, they'll give you monthly bonuses. And I'm like, wow, I didn't expect that. I really got just shy of $100 last month. And I'm like, oh, I didn't do anything. So I like those aspects, but the fact that you can't promote it through Amazon or anything else, if readers don't know about it, then they're never going to find it. And so that makes it a little difficult.
Yeah, that's really unusual to hear that you would think that there would be things in place for Amazon to really be pushing this, because I would assume that if it does well in the US, then they might open it up to other areas of the world as well. So that's unusual.
Hopefully they do. I mean, it's been in beta for about a year now. So I think there's still a bit to go, and I think they're going to try and put more into it. But right now, yeah, if you've got a large audience, then it might work great. I don't have a large audience like that yet. So
Yeah. And do you think most authors that use it are just putting out like an episode a week, or are some people doing it faster than that?
I've seen some where they're putting out an episode a day. I do 2 episodes a week.
Oh, yeah.
And I've seen some people do one every 2 weeks, some just whenever they want to. One of the big things they push is if you want a successful Vella, consistency is key. So like with anything else in writing, just be consistent with what you're doing.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. I think for me as a reader, I would struggle with wanting to read Kindle Vella because I'm too impatient. I want everything at my hand now. It's like, why we've got Netflix and everything like that. So you can binge watch something, having to wait for an author to release another episode or chapter of a book could potentially be a little frustrating, I think. So definitely that consistency is key for sure.
Yeah. And then when you're having to pay for each chapter, people are like, I'm just going to wait. And then I buy the book and I've got the whole thing. And then there's no waiting. There is, that vision there where people like the episodes where they're just like, oh, I'm going to go for a run on the treadmill. I just want to read something. Well, maybe not while they're running on the treadmill, but standing in line to the grocery store or something. Well, I'm just going to read a quick chapter while I'm waiting. And, it might work for some situations, but a lot of people just like to sit down and read a book.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, it's definitely an interesting idea. And you're the first person I've talked to who's actually given that a go. So it'll be interesting to see what you think of it down the line if you decide to keep going with it as well.
I've got a newsletter that I put out once a month that I'm trying to give updates on how that's going. So if anybody wants to follow that, I can get updates on where Kindle Vella's at.
Oh, cool. That's cool. So what do you do then for your marketing and advertising and all of that? Do you do ads? I've seen you a little bit, I think, on TikTok as well and social media. So what are your main kind of platforms then for getting eyes on your books?
Oh, this is where I struggle because I'm not as big into social media as I thought I would be. And I'm not a fan of TikTok, but I need to get better at it. What I did when A Clandestine Queen was released in April, I did a blog tour. So I paid for a blog tour and that helped. I did a Goodreads giveaway contest for a month and that got a lot of eyes on the book. I will post about my book, but one thing that I'm really pushing right now is just to get my book in people's hands. So I'm setting up a lot of events over the next month and a half. I think I've got 6 book signings that I'm going to go to, and then I'm setting up some school visits. But I think right now that's going to be my big push because I want to get actual books into people's hands that I know. They say that the best advertising is word of mouth, but you've got to have at least 1,000 books out so you get that.
Yeah.
And if I can directly put books into people's hands by selling them at book signings or, farmers market, school visits, then I get to interact directly with the readers. And I think that could help as well. That's kind of what I'm pushing right now.
Can you talk a little bit? I haven't heard of this before, but a blog tour. What's a blog tour?
A blog tour, and apparently there's quite a few people who host them, is you find somebody who hosts them and they reach out to bloggers and bookstagrammers and TikTokers or anyone who's a type of influencer in the book world. And then they'll say, hey, I've got this book that I'm doing a tour for. And as you go, they are able to sign up for things like they can have the author do an interview. They can just post excerpts of the book. They can decide, I'm going to read the book and then put up a review for it. And so they take out the work for you trying to find all of these people on your own. It's like, okay, I'm going to pay you $150. And for 3 weeks, we're going to get as many book bloggers and bookstagrammers and whatever to take part in this. And so I really liked that. It was a lot of fun. The only thing that I don't know if it didn't work in my favor, just I didn't have it. Since I'm traditionally published, I don't have immediate numbers to say, okay, I can see that these people are going to Amazon or whatever, buying the book. So I didn't have those numbers. So the one thing that I did do in regards to advertising, which I'll probably do again, is before I published my book along with the blog tour, is I printed out little business cards that had the picture of the book on the front, and then on the back was a QR code that they could scan to get 5 chapters for free. And I took those everywhere. And because it linked directly through my website, I could track every person who scanned it, which was a lot better for me because I could actually see the turnover from what I was trying to do. And when I did the blog tour, I just did the link for my website as well. So I could see who was going to the website, but I couldn't see actual book sales. But tracking the internet traffic, the website traffic was good as well.
Yeah, that's cool. That's an interesting way to kind of work those metrics, and using the QR code for the first 5 chapters. That's such a great idea. I'm glad you're able to share these tips. This is why I love talking to different authors, because we all seem to come at things a slightly different way. And there's always things that we haven't thought of before that's going to be just a perfect fit for somebody listening, which is so cool. So, yeah, I appreciate you sharing those kind of things. So far on your author journey, what do you think has been maybe the hardest part, or the part that you have struggled with the most?
I think there are 2 hardest parts for me, especially. The first one is when I first wanted to be a writer. I was past the short story stage. The hardest part was completing a novel. And I think that's where a lot of people give up, is they think, okay, this is too hard. I can sit down and write 1,000 words, but 80,000 words, I just can't do it. So I think the hardest part was to actually complete the first novel so I could tell myself, you know what, I've done it, and I just have to get better at it. So yeah, completing that first novel was a huge, huge accomplishment, but it was one of the hardest things. And if anyone listening is at that point where they're like, you know, I want to write a book, I want to write it, and maybe they've started once or twice, that first book is always the hardest because you don't know how to write a book yet.
Yeah.
And once you get past that hurdle, you can say, you know what, I've done it before, I know I can do it again. And the second hardest part, which I'm dealing with right now, is now that I have a published book out there, it's figuring out how to get it noticed. When I first started writing, my goal was, you know, I just want a book, my own book on my bookshelf.
Mm-hmm.
And I got that. I self-published the book and I printed it out and I put it on my bookshelf. And as soon as I hit that goal, I'm like, that's not good enough. Now I want my book on everyone's bookshelf. And so it's a hard task. It's daunting. But when I struggled through it, I realized that I can look back and be like, you know what? I wanted to give up when I was writing my first book, but I didn't.
Yeah.
And I got there to the point where I finished it, and then I did it again, and I did it again. And now I can look at it in the same way with marketing and advertising and getting my book out there. I've done something hard before. I can do something hard again.
That's great. That's cool. That's a nice change of mindset with getting it noticed, because you know that you've persevered through things being hard before and somehow you've muddled through and worked it out. But with your very first novel and the struggle that you had with completing your first novel, going from short story to novel, how did you push through that? Can I do this? Can I write this much? Like, I know you said that the words started to flow and the story flowed all of a sudden for you, but those moments of self-doubt, what kept you going?
Honestly, I think it was, and I think an author who's written a book can attest to this, is there's that feeling inside of you once you actually start it. You just think, I've started, I have to get this story out. If I just leave it inside, it's going to eat me up, and I just got to get it out. And the one thing that is so amazing, and for first time writers and authors, you'll get to discover this, is writing a book. You might outline it, but it takes you in places you never expected. And I was writing a book once where I got to the end. And when I wrote the last 2 words or the last 3 words, not the end, but I'm like, I got chills. I'm like, I didn't even expect that ending. That was so awesome. And I think that's what helped get me through it, is just knowing I had to get this out, and just the experience I've had with, I understand where I want the story to go, but I don't know where it's going, was such an adventure. And I wasn't ready to give it up.
Yeah, that's cool. It really is. I found that quite a few times myself. It's almost like reading a book, writing a book, because I get to the point sometimes where I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? I really want to find out what's going to happen next, even though I've got a vague plot. But the story does, it just takes you in different directions. Like when you're reading a book and you want to know what's going to happen in the next chapter and turn the page, the only frustration being if you haven't written it yet, you've got to actually get your butt in the chair and do that. But yeah, it's cool.
And the weird thing is, and I don't know if this has happened to you in writing, but sometimes after I've written something and I let it sit for a while and I'll go back and read it. And I'm just like, ooh, I just want to keep reading.
Yeah.
And then I remember, oh wait, I wrote this. I know what's going to happen. And I think that's a great moment when you realize I've written the story I want to read. And now that I'm reading it, I want to keep reading, even though I know I wrote it and I know what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's almost otherworldly. Like it's really cool. And I can't think of a way to really segue into this, but we were talking before the show and we've got something in similar in that we both like ghost stories and things like that. And this probably has zero to do with writing, but I am dying to know. You said you've got something, an experience that you've had, and so I would love to hear it, one of your past jobs or something like that. Do you think you could share that?
Yeah, I definitely can. And I've tried to put this into writing, and I wrote a crap story that one day I'll fix it up and make it better, and I'll put out my first ghost story. But set the mood. I live in a valley in northern Utah, and there's this old hotel that was built in the 1970s. And it was a convention center. People held a lot of weddings there. And I remember in 2014 or 2015, um, right around there, I decided I'd worked in Alaska and the national parks, working in the concessions there doing hotel work. And I realized, okay, I really like working in hotels. And there's this hotel that I would really like to work at. And so I interviewed and I got a job. And I started working at the front desk of this hotel called Sherwood Hills Resort, which is no longer open, unfortunately, just because it was a lot of fun to work there. And almost from day one, I started hearing stories, especially from the restaurant kitchen staff. And the one thing that was most prevalent was the story of the woman in the white dress. And, I worked there for years and nothing ever really happened with it. You never see anything. Well, I never saw the woman in the white dress. And so this first story just makes all of that so worth it, just thinking about it. We had this lady who worked there as our wedding coordinator. She would set up all the weddings, and her daughter was babysitting the daughter of another person who was related somehow to the hotel. And they were in the restaurant, they were having lunch, and the girl doing the babysitting was listening to music on her earphones. And she looks up, and the girl that she's babysitting is just eating her fries. And it looks like she's talking to somebody in the restaurant, but they were the only ones there. There was nobody else in the entire restaurant. And so the babysitter takes out her earbuds and just listens for a minute. And the little girl's saying, oh, yeah, are you guys staying here too? Just having a conversation like with somebody standing there, but there was nobody there. And when she ended the conversation, the babysitter was like, who are you talking to? Oh, just another guest. And well, what did she look like? Oh, she had dark hair. She was wearing a white dress and just walking up and down the restaurant, and freaked out. This girl, the babysitter, never went back into the restaurant. But the funny thing about the restaurant is, for a time, I was the restaurant manager there. And I had to go in one morning for an early buffet that we were setting up on Sunday. And I took a picture of this. I've got it somewhere. But I was setting up the utensils on all the tables, and I do it systematically. So I know, okay, everything is done. And so I get all of the silverware set, and I go around the corner to get the glasses because I know I'm okay, done with the silverware. Everything is done. And I come back in, and there is one place setting where the silverware had been swapped. It was all at an exact, everything was at the same angle. And I'm like, started looking around and I'm like, who did that? Nobody else is here. But half the time I felt like somebody was watching me.
Yeah.
But I think there are two things that I'll tell now that are probably the coolest haunted experiences. There was a night where, oh, three stories, just because they're all fun and they're spooky.
And this is the power of storytelling right here. This is why we do this, right?
Yeah. We were having a meeting. There's about 5 people there, and we didn't have any guests in the hotel. And during winter, we would close down 3 nights a week just because nobody would come up and they didn't want to spend the money on keeping the hotel open. So we were all sitting in the lobby and just discussing, okay, when are we going to close? What we're going to do? And we hear a noise and we turn around and we watch the door to the back office open and then close. And we're like, what? We knew no one else was there. So I go around and I'm looking up and down the halls to see if anybody wanted to come out. I'm like, there is nobody there. So we just watched the door open and closed, just all by itself. And that just encouraged me. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go ghost hunting.
Love it.
And so there was this other girl who worked there. And she's like, I want to know too. So one night that the hotel was closed, we decided, okay, it's like 9, 10 o'clock at night. We're going to go catch some ghosts. And the one place that we want to go to is the restaurant because most stuff that happened in the restaurant. And so when you're in the lobby, you have to go down this little ramp that takes you to the restaurant door, which was closed. And we know, okay, we're going to go find some ghosts. So we're walking down the ramp. And as soon as my hand gets to the doorknob, it sounded like somebody hit the other side of the door with their fist as hard as they could.
My God.
Like the door shook. The girl I was with screamed. She ran outside. I'm done.
Yeah,
I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
And I was too afraid to even open the door. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm done. I'm done. And the funny thing is I spent a lot of nights there because I would do the overnight shift. One of the most common things to ever happen is I would be doing my paperwork for the night and I would get all the receipts. And I'm like, okay, put it right in front of the computer because I've got to go enter it, but I got to go back to the printer. And then I would come back and all my paperwork's done. And this happened multiple times. I would look for half an hour. I'd be like, I know I left it right here. And then I go back, okay, where could I have put it? I'm going to have to print everything out again. And then I go back to my computer and it's back.
Wow.
And I'm just like, what is going on? And I would see there would be shadows moving across the walls. But the coolest story, I think, didn't even happen to me. It was to the general manager of the hotel. There was a night where the hotel was closed and she had forgotten the money. And so she had to go back up to get the money because we didn't want to leave it there overnight. And her husband drove her up. And he stopped right in front of the hotel, right in front of the doors. And she's like, all right, okay, I'll be just a second. I'm going to go grab the money. And so this is what happens. She goes and gets the money. She runs to the restroom and she comes back out. And she's like, all right, let's go. And her husband wouldn't move. And she's like, what? What's wrong? And he asks her, I thought you said you were the only one here. She's like, I am. There's nobody in the hotel tonight. He said, I saw you walk into the bathroom. And then a man walked from the hall and down into the restaurant. She's like, no, there's no one there. She said he's peeled out so fast. He left the hotel and he never went back.
My gosh. That is some pretty cool stories. So I hope you're going to give it another attempt at actually writing these down because I think anybody listening to this has probably got, those little bit of goosebumps and that going on. Like they're cool. And this is what the whole power of story is. This is why we are drawn to that, right? Particularly fantasy or supernatural or paranormal writing or anything like that. It's really about thinking about the world in a slightly different way, which is pretty cool. So yeah, those are some neat experiences you've had.
Yeah, it was definitely fun. I grew up in a haunted house. There are a lot of areas in where I'm from that are supposedly haunted. So I've got just tons of stories. Campfire stories is the best to sit around a fire and just scare people.
I absolutely adore ghost stories. I've had lots of cool experiences myself. I feel kind of fortunate for that, to have those experiences. But yeah, I really appreciate you sharing those with us. And I really do hope that you get an opportunity to actually write some of these down one day, because I think that would be very, very cool. Very cool.
Well, in my new book, it comes out, Me and Lewis and the Summer Camp First comes out on August 9th. And I think I tried my hand a little bit at writing something spooky. because in the premise of this story is these kids have to find a stolen gem, that when the gem was stolen, it released the spirit of a necromancer. And to really survive and do what she needs to, the necromancer has to possess bodies.
Oh,
And the main character has a dream of the necromancer trying to possess him. And it's kids, so it's not
yeah.
too scary. But
Yeah.
when I think about it, I'm like, on a deeper level, that's pretty dark and spooky.
Yeah. But you know what? From my experience of teaching kids, they love that. They really do. They like those things that just scare them a little bit and give them the goosebumps. And those are the stories that appeal to them. So I think you're going to do well with those. Well, thank you so much. Any final advice you want to give for anybody who is wanting to write? Maybe they're just starting out or they're wanting to go the traditional route, or what's your kind of favorite go-to authorly advice?
I think the best advice that I can give is in two parts. And first, it's read, because that's going to be the best way to figure out first what story you want to tell, because you're going to read what you like, what stories you like. It's going to tell you what markets well, what sells well. So just read, which unfortunately life has become very busy for me, and I read much less right now than I care to admit. But I think that the second thing, and maybe the even word for it, is write for yourself instead of thinking, I'm going to write this book and it's going to be the most famous thing ever. If you come away thinking, you know what, I want to write a story that I want to read and then be happy just reading it, you're writing for the right reasons, I think, at least in the beginning.
Yeah.
And I think, just read, and then write for yourself in the beginning till you're at that point where you're like, okay, now I'm ready for someone else to read it. Hopefully then they'll love it too.
Yeah. I think that's so important. Both of those. I mean, reading goes without saying, but if you're going to spend the time and the energy and the effort writing, it's got to be something that brings you joy. So you might as well write something that, really lights you up as well, that you love. So that's awesome.
I think if you can write something that you love, chances are other people are going to find it as well, and they're going to like it.
Yeah.
Because whatever you read and you write similar to, there's a huge market for it. But have persistence. It's going to be hard.
Yeah, it's not easy. And this is why it's good to make sure that your heart is in it and that you are writing those things that you want to read. You're absolutely right. That's cool. Now, how can people find you and connect with you, and where can they get your books? Because I know after listening to this, they're going to be wanting to seek your books out and that, because they look amazing. I know I'm going to be downloading them myself so I can have a read and everything too. So how can people find them and connect with you?
Yeah, my books are all on Amazon. So if you search Brandon J. Greer, you'll find them. There's a couple other writers, I think, with the name Brandon Greer, but not with Brandon J. Greer. So if you look up Brandon J. Greer on Amazon, you can find it. You can also find my website at brandonjgreer.wix.com/books, something like that.
I'll find it. I'll put it in the show notes anyway, for sure.
It's like knowing your own phone number. You never call yourself.
No, I know. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been so fun chatting to you. And I so appreciate you sharing those ghost stories. It's a bit of a selfish indulgence because I love listening to those. So thank you for that.
Well, I have plenty more ghost stories, and thank you for having me.
Oh, it's been a joy. Thank you. Wasn't that such a fun episode? So here are some takeaways from today's show. 1. Brandon recommends 3 essentials for your query letter. Ensure it creates sympathy for your main character, create some mystery, but also give a little bit away as a hook. 2. Kindle Vella is great for accountability and consistency, but you will have to find your own advertising avenues for it. 3. Blog tours, Goodreads giveaways and book signings and events, including visiting schools, a great way to get YA and middle grade books into people's hands. 4. The hardest part of being an author, in Brandon's opinion, is writing your first book. But after you've written your first book, you know you've done it once, so you can do it again. And number 5, Brendan's top advice for those who want to write books is to read as much as possible. It'll help make it clear the genres that appeal to you, as well as give you information about the market. And be sure to write for yourself, particularly in the beginning. So make sure you check out the show notes for links to connect with Brandon and check out his books. Also, if you enjoy ghost stories, make sure you check out my books at payhip.com/JoBure and take advantage of the coupon code SPOOKY to get 50% off for October only. Otherwise, have a wonderful week, my friends, and happy writing.